Hi, my name is John Kew, and I'm actually on the one of the engineers on the Truth and Ingress team, and we are responsible for taking public data and making sure it gets out of city governments and gets into Socrata in a reliable way, so that there's no mistakes, it's stored safely. And the interesting thing about the Truth and Ingress team is, ETL it's a very complicated thing, as anyone working in government has known for a long time. And we've gone through a number of different iterations at Socrata of sort of the best way to approach this. So I'm going to draw out sort of a number of different endpoints that we have in order to ingress data into Socrata. So the first one is I'm going to talk about our HTTP API. So our API at the HTTP level. And we have a number of different ways of ingressing data through this. We have the older SOTA 1 library. And not a whole lot of people are familiar with SOTA 1. If you're using one of our old Java libraries to do publish operations, you're using SOTA 1. Or if you actually know some of our undocumented APIs, you probably have worked out the details of SOTA 1. But SOTA 1 is being phased out for a good reason. It's very difficult to reliably ingress a lot of data through SOTA 1, and it's very expensive in the end. It just doesn't make sense for highly dynamic data sets and even much larger data sets that customers are starting to come out with now. But SOTA 1, in order to sort of describe some of the changes we're making, we should kind of go over a little bit some of the problems. One thing is that a client or a user using SOTA 1 through any sort of interface will end up sending up their entire data set through our HTTP API. And this has some significant network limits. But then on the other side, SOTA 1 will go ahead and directly replace that data set using working copies and some other notions you might already be familiar with. But it'll replace that entire data set within some of our databases. So temporarily, we have two copies of this data set within the same database. And this is actually a bit problematic because just the chain of events that needs to happen can be a little bit risky. So a couple of years ago, we began working on SOTA 2. And as part of SOTA 2, we have the upsert API. The upsert API is significantly different. Instead of accepting entire data sets, we accept little discrete changes over time. So let's say you have a crimes data set. You can just upload sort of the last day's worth of crimes or the last hour's worth of crimes in little tiny chunks. And it can go ahead and, fewer changes that you actually need to make here, and it can go in and just update the data set directly. The overall sort of process that needs to happen here to update the data set is significantly more reliable because there's actually less to do. This doesn't actually help anyone because in order to use upsert, you actually need to chunk up your file and send small little discrete changes. So as I discussed this in another interview, but we came up with this other system called Delta Importer. Delta Importer. Delta Importer has both an HTTP API and an FTP API. So you can FTP your entire file directly in, or you can use, in combination with another system called DataSync, you can send small discrete changes up into Delta Importer. And Delta Importer's sole job is to just make sure that these data sets and the changes to those data sets are applied in a reliable way. So it's responsible for matching up sort of the changes that are coming in with an existing data set, querying our internal databases to figure out sort of the delta changes, and then going ahead to send the small, discrete, but verified changes. And Delta Importer is really the way that we're moving forward for all of our bulk import and all of our automated ETL processes. Whereas SOTA 2 is actually a great system if you have like one-off little changes that you need to make, to a particular data set. They're all very complementary APIs. In fact, actually Delta Importer uses the Upsert API itself to perform all of its operations. So that's a summary of sort of Ingress 101 when it comes to Socrata. There's another component which is also ingressing. Once these changes are in, we go ahead and we queue up a number of different changes to make those data sets searchable. And that happens after those changes are applied to the data set. So some period of time, usually on the order of less than a minute, we can make those changes to the data set searchable.